For more on the increase in export of natural gas by Nigeria and the factors driving the growth, we're now joined by Yinka Opeke, CEO of Smart Energies, a leading gas distribution and renewable energy company. Thank you very much for joining us on Newsnight.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to know that Nigeria has huge, gas reserves, 210 trillion, around that, cubic feet.
Yes.
But what's responsible for this uptick, and more importantly, how will it contribute to the national purse?
Okay, so thanks for having me. It's always nice to be on the show. I would like to pin it here by saying that our gas reforms in Nigeria is only as strong as the infrastructure that supports it, right? And based on what you have just said now, and based on what is in the public space, about 8.6 trillion naira was generated, from gas exports in 2024, which is a great thing, And one of the biggest things that, I think is a factor is in terms of global demand. There's just global demand, essentially from Europe and Asia. And the European one, you actually accorded to the Russian-Ukraine conflicts, because Europe used to depend a lot on the Russian gas, and of course, what is going on now. So this period, honestly, presents a huge, like a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Nigeria to be a reliable and dependable energy partner, to Europe and the rest of the world. So the global demand is one thing. There's also just that increase in energy demand, because everybody is trying to make gas the transition fuel, making it in so many places, even in Nigeria as well. So I'd like to link that to increase in revenue as well, because the export is also revenue, and even internally, the domestic infrastructure expansion is also something to commend. For example, NNPC in partnership, it's a government-backed and private sector-led initiative where they commissioned 5 mini-LNG plants, exactly in Kogi and Ajaokuta. That's a great one for domestic transition as well, and then the AKK pipeline that is still ongoing as well. There's also a lot of strategic partnerships. Nigeria is in partnership with Algeria and Nigeria for the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline to also transport gas to Europe. They're also in talks with Libya to create the regional gas, pipeline. So there are quite a number of things along those lines that are, and of course, domestically and generally, even though the poverty level in Nigeria is still debatable, globally, people are also transitioning gradually from the very low class to the lower income earners. So they are also looking for better ways of living, and people are also transitioning to using of cooking gas, CNG, like we just watched now. So it's just a whole lot of factors, but essentially is the increase in global demand.
Indeed. Trying to harness this blue gold, like we call it, a shift from the black gold. But you see, like you've said, it's like you're reading my mind. A lot of focus seems to be on the global markets, the exports. You are a player in the industry. One, I would like to ask you, apart from infrastructure, which you've highlighted as a challenge, what are the other big choke points that are affecting, from the full potential being felt? But particularly my concern is about the domestic market. How much of all of this growth is being felt in the domestic market? Are we prioritizing export and leaving out? Because we've seen that in some commodities. Is that happening to gas?
So I wouldn't say that. So in terms of the domestic, so I would try to relate this to the PIA. There are a lot of gas reforms, that they are giving incentives for gas development, more favorable fiscal policies, reduced royalties. There's also the middle, what's called this one? It's called the Midstream Downstream Gas Infrastructure Fund. And that is also to promote, project financing and things like that in the domestic markets. And I talked about the AKK as well. So to be honest, a lot is being done in terms of creating the infrastructure. I started by saying the infrastructure is very important. And also vandalization is a big thing as well, right? It's also covered in the PIA. Talking about there's this trust that they have now, host community trust fund, something like that, so that they can also give back to the community, let them have a sense of engagement and things like that, and ownership. Because when you continue to have that sense of ownership, there's a reduced likelihood that you continue to destroy the infrastructure, right? So all those things, can continue to help in terms of it, because now, because of the increased awareness and advocacy done by companies like us and so many other companies, and even the government, people are having increasing awareness of why they should use LPG, CNG, and all of that. So there's also that increased demand. Sometimes you give cylinders in some locations, and you're wondering how would they refill fill those cylinders. There are concerns around that. So government has a lot to do in terms of creating an enabling structure that is investor stable, and so that people can come into the sector. So for example, people like us, if I go to an environment now and I give them, for example, 5,000 cylinders, I have increased the demand for gas. But there has to be other private sector players who are willing to do gas plants in those locations, for refill. That's why it's sustainable. So back to your question, the government is doing quite a bit, and we're hoping that if they continue to sustain this, to be honest, in no distant time, 1 or 2 decades, gas can actually rival crude oil, as one of our top earning revenues, for the country.
It's interesting you say that, and maybe the second leg to Adeswa's question, because I mean there are experts who say that local demand, may suffer as Nigeria exports 86% of oil output and 36% of gas. And you've answered my next question really to a large extent, because I'm going to ask, how do we sustain this trajectory? What are the key things that must be in place for Nigeria to sustain this level of improvement in our gas exports? And in addition to that, can we really set the price of gas in a way that can actually double our gas revenue?
Okay, so I know that the PIA is also supporting decentralizing pricing. In the local markets, is regulated by NMDPRA, Nigerian downstream, midstream, and then, but in the global markets, it's quite different. There's the global contracts on export, and then the dynamics of that, so it's not regulated. Now, back to your point, can we sustain it? The problem is a lot of Nigerians have lost faith in the leadership. So even when things are being done and attempts are being made and efforts are being made, just because of how they feel disappointed over the years, it's hard for them to see when things are working. So I feel like a lot of public-private partnerships still have to happen. The private sector has to have confidence in the government that you want us to thrive, because the more you support my business, the more it trickles down, to the rural areas, to you and I, so because there's the issue around accessibility, there's affordability, there's the advocacy, because in all the pillars, when you talk about domestic utilization of gas, cooking gas is still a very major one, right? And now we're talking about CNG for transportation and all. So I don't think the government can do it in isolation, and I don't think private sector companies can do it in isolation. So I still think that we continue to foster strategic partnerships like that makes it very viable, for investors like us to still continue to invest in the sector, and take from them.
Very well said. Yinka
Opeke. Even I was trying, Opeke. You were trying to change me.
Thank you for that moral support, Opeke. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Smart Energies, and smartly breaking it down to us tonight on Nigeria's Blue Gold. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.